Sounds great. So thank you guys all for coming. And I will introduce myself with a little bit of background on what I do and who I am. And then I'm going to roll into the topic for this evening. So I'm Hannah Burrack. I am a entomology professor at NC State. My research and extension activities cover berry crops as well as tobacco and industrial hemp. So I have kind of an eclectic crop combination. And in berries, I do a fair amount of work in strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, and grapes. And so that's the main focus. I'm going to be focusing this evening on strawberries, blueberries, and caneberries. So that's going to be the focus of the information I share with you guys tonight. And just a little bit of a bookkeeping note as far as how I like these virtual meetings to run. Please feel free as I am going to type questions in the chat box. I keep the chat box open in the corner of my screen. And so if I see something pop up, I will try to address it in the moment. And if not, I will grab it at the very end while we're on the concluding slide. So don't hesitate to type questions in as we're going. And for this evening, I have three main goals. So the topic at hand, managing insect pests in blueberries, strawberries, and blackberries is a lot. And so I am not going to be able to cover all of the different pests and all of the different management strategies for them. But what I'm hoping to do at the end of tonight is to be able to connect you with the resources to answer questions that you have after today, and then help you to identify what key pests might be present in those crops if you are growing them, and to make a management decision to determine if management is necessary. And so that's going to be the main focus here, but please do drill down deeper with questions about specific organisms if you have them. I also recognize a few of the names popping in across the chat box and the waiting room as people are logging in. And so I know there's a real diversity of experience here, and I'm trying to kind of pitch this right down the middle in terms of not too much detail for folks who are just getting started, or maybe more garden focused, and not too little detail for some of our really experienced folks here. So again, ask questions as we go on. All right, so first, just to familiarize you with some of the general resources that are available out there where I share pest management information. We first have the crop-specific portals through our extension system, so the strawberry portal, the blueberry portal, and the blackberry and raspberry portal. And I regularly post information here when we have new updates relative to these crops. In addition to those resources, I hope that you get your hands on a copy of the Southern Region Integrated Pest Management Guides for the crops that you are growing. If you go to smallfruits.org, there's an IPM and production guide link right across the top. And those are annually updated production guides that have regional applications. And so they include experts, my peers, from all of the surrounding states. And they're really valuable. We spend a lot of time and energy thinking about these. And so I'd encourage you to use that kind of as your Bible. The nice thing about those is that they are organized by crop phenology, meaning the stage of the crop at different times of the year. And so you can look at what's happening during bloom, during pre-bloom, during harvest, and during the dormant season for all of those crops. North Carolina specific management information really focused on pesticides and some other management tools is in the NC Ag Chem manual, which you can find at this link here. At the end of this presentation, I will drop all of these links in the chat box if you want to grab them from there. All right, so when we think about management in berry crops and in any other crop, we have three management strategies that we can utilize. So we can utilize cultural controls, and these are practices that decrease the attractiveness of your crop to insects, or and they provide a level of control without either biological or chemical controls. And you can use these if you're in your home garden. You can use these if you're a commercial grower. These are resources that work, or management tactics that work across the board. Then we have biological controls. Those are the use of predators, parasites, or pathogens to control insects. And these are things that might be available to non-commercial growers, but they're often more effective on larger scales. So there's things that might be more practical or more beneficial for our commercial growers. And then finally, chemical controls. And these include both organic and conventional insecticides and miticides. And when you're looking for commercial recommendations, you want to check those active ingredients. And if you are not a non-commercial grower, you can compare those to materials that you can access as a homeowner. And of course, we never want to use a material if a crop doesn't appear on the label. And so when you are trying to compare to perhaps non-commercial products, you want to make sure that what you're utilizing has the crop that you want to treat on the label itself. In addition to those crop-specific resources, I also regularly post information on our entomology portal, which is entomology.ces.ncsu.edu. And then I also have social media platforms that I share information from as well. So both on Facebook and Twitter, you can find additional resources there. And as you have questions about what is feeding on your berry crops, the main resource I will direct you to, and your county extension agents will direct you to as well, is the NCSU Plant Disease and Insect Clinic. And so pdic.ces.ncsu.edu is their website. And this is the first place I go when I can't answer a question about the identity of a pest. Our diagnostician there is extremely good at identifying all sorts of things that might be unexpected and surprising. But before you go there, there's also some resources you can leverage to identify what organisms might be feeding on your plants. And those include some image archives. And so when you send me an image over email, or when Janelle or one of the other agents sends me an image over email, one of the first places I'll go to if I don't immediately recognize it are Bugwood and Bug Guide. And if you have a little bit of knowledge, if you know kind of what you're looking for, you know that it might be a ground beetle or a specific type of insect, you have a rough idea of what plant it was feeding on, these resources can be really good to help narrow down what you're looking at. They don't work quite as well if you have no idea what you're looking at. So if you go in and search green caterpillar, you might get a whole bunch of things that are not what you're looking for. But if you've got a little bit of knowledge, these are really handy resources as well. And oftentimes this is the first place I'll go to identify something that I'm not immediately familiar with. All right, so those are some of the resources you have available to help answer your management questions. And now let's talk about some of our specific pests in berry crops. And so first, I'm going to start off in blueberries. This is going to be a similar figure that you're going to see for all of the three crops that I'm going to talk about tonight. So I have the stage of the crop along the bottom of the slide, and then I have the pests overlaid across the time, the stage of the crop at which they are present and causing damage. And then next to each pest name, I have a little icon. If it's a fruit, that means that they feed on fruit or flowers. If it's a bundle of sticks, that means they feed on stems or branches. And if it's a leaf, that means they feed on foliage or leaves. And so that helps you narrow down what they might be feeding on. And so this is the suite of insect pests that can cause problems in blueberries in North Carolina. But practically, I get the most questions about these four pests. That would be cherry fruitworm and cranberry fruitworm, blueberry maggot fly, and spotted wing Drosophila. And these are our most common fruit feeding pests, which makes sense that that's why I get the most questions about them, because they're the things that are in your berries or on your berries when you're getting ready to harvest them and use them. And so just a quick rundown of what they look like so you can identify which of these pests those might be. So cherry fruitworm have larvae that are pink. So it's an easy thing to remember. They're kind of the color that you would expect something that's called cherry fruitworm to be. And eggs of both of these species are going to be laid on the calyx cup and young fruits. So right after petal fall, that little flat green developing berry is where the moths are going to lay their eggs. And then cranberry fruitworm is shown down here. Their larvae are yellow or kind of neon green. And the key difference between cherry fruitworm and cranberry fruitworm is the number of berries they impact. I'll show you that on the next slide. But the life cycle of these, eggs are laid on the young fruit. They develop internally in one, two, or several berries. They pupate after after berries have been infested, but usually before harvest occurs. And then that whole process repeats. Both of these species have 1 generation per year. So here's the damage from these 2 different species. So for cranberry fruitworm, they damage more than 2 berries at a time, and they move between the fruit. And so when you see this cluster of frass, or what is just a fancy word for insect poop, around a bunch of berries, that is likely injury due to cranberry fruitworm. And then again, you see that kind of green, yellowy larva there. Cherry fruitworm, on the other hand, damages typically 2 berries at a time. And a really common indication that you have cherry fruitworm injury is when you have a prematurely ripe berry on a cluster that is otherwise still green, and that prematurely ripe berry is stuck to the berry next to it. And that's because the cherry fruitworm larva will make a tunnel to move between those 2 berries when it's done feeding on the first one. And so that's a really easy way to distinguish between the injury due to these 2 caterpillars. And as I said, oftentimes they complete their larval development before we reach our harvest period in blueberries. So you may never actually see the larvae present. You may only see their damage left on the plant. All right, so let's move on to talk about blueberry maggot. Blueberry maggot are flies, but the larvae are called maggots, which is where they get their name from. The other fly larvae that you might find in blueberries and other crops are spotted wing Drosophila, or SWD. And these 2 different larvae have different shapes. Blueberry maggot larvae are carrot-shaped, meaning they're pointed on one end and blunt on the rear end, whereas Drosophila larvae are pointed on both ends. And you can see that here in this image as well as in this illustration. And here's a blueberry maggot larva curled up in a C. They're not always C-shaped. This just happened to be how it was grabbed in this picture. Blueberry maggot are larger than spotted wing Drosophila when they're mature, but younger stages can be similar in size to spotted wing Drosophila. So size is not a great indicator of blueberry maggot versus spotted wing Drosophila. Shape is a much better indicator. Adult blueberry maggot flies look like this. They are about half the size of a housefly, and they're about twice as big as spotted wing Drosophila flies, which look like this. You're unlikely to see blueberry maggot or spotted wing Drosophila out in your field unless you are actively trapping for them. So you would have to be utilizing either yellow sticky traps to catch these blueberry maggot flies, or liquid-based traps to catch these spotted wing Drosophila flies. One of the cool things that I like about blueberry maggot flies is if you squint at this picture and look at the patterns on the wings, it's actually mimicking a jumping spider. And so that's a form of mimicry to deter predation on that wing pattern. Blueberry maggot have 1 generation per year. They become active in North Carolina toward the end of May, which is when they start infesting fruit. And they're typically more problematic for some of our mid-period harvest fruit. So not our earliest berries, usually not our latest berries, but our fruit that's harvested right around the middle of our harvest period for blueberries. All right, so now I'm going to move on to strawberries. And in strawberries, again, we have from dormant through harvest, and then superimposed our most significant pests that are present in strawberries. And again, you can see there's a lot of different organisms that we can have attacking strawberries. But of the ones that we care the most about, I'm going to focus on 2-spotted spider mite, because consistently they are year in, year out, our most significant pest damaging strawberries. And I'm going to quickly walk you through a timeline for which you can look for these different organisms in strawberries. And so post-transplant, which occurs in the fall here, we look for spider mites and aphids during that period to make sure we're not taking plants that have infestation into the field. Then we look at the plants following transplant, usually once per week, to look for any caterpillar injury that might appear. Through winter, we continue to look for things like aphids and spider mites, particularly before putting on row covers, if that's going to be our method of frost protection. And then once our plants have ended dormancy and our springtime temperatures are exceeding 50 degrees on a regular basis, usually for a week or so at a time, then we start scouting for spider mites on a regular basis once per week. And typically this occurs usually around mid-March. It's looking like we are right on schedule to have that happen this year as well. You continue to scout for spider mites through harvest. And then once you have fruit present, you can start looking at your plants for insects that might injure buds or fruit. And so we can look for things like strawberry clipper weevil, lygus bugs, as well as thrips. And then finally, as you enter harvest and have ripe fruit out there, you're going to look for things like spotted wing Drosophila and potentially sap beetle. So let's talk a little bit more about spider mites, because again, they are our most common year in, year out pest in strawberries. Female spider mites are shown here on the left on the upper part of the slide, and male spider mites next to them. You can see lots of nice eggs above this male. Those hatch into nymphs, which have 6 legs, which then molt into, they hatch into larvae, which have 6 legs, which then molt into nymphs. There's a resting stage for those nymphs before they are mature adults. And you can see this male spider mite is guarding this female nymph who is resting before she emerges as a reproductively mature adult. They will mate, and then that whole process will repeat. This process can repeat in as little as a week. And so you can turn lots of generations really quickly. Our basics for controlling spider mite include scouting early once spring temperatures exceed that 50 Fahrenheit on a regular basis. You want to treat populations that are greater than 5 mites per leaflet on your berries before you start harvesting. Once you start harvesting, that threshold increases to at least 15 mites per leaflet. You want to avoid the use of pyrethroid insecticides when you have spider mites present, because they will flare your spider mite populations. And if you're trying to utilize biological control, for example, predatory mites, you do not want to use things like oils or soaps following that predator mite release, because oils and soaps are also going to kill predatory mites just as effectively as they will spider mites. All right, so finally, I'm going to wrap up talking about raspberries and blackberries. And again, same format here. We've got the stage of the crop across the bottom and the different organisms shown here. And you can see in some cases, blackberries and raspberries share some common pests with strawberries, including spider mites, sap beetles, and strawberry clipper, as well as spotted wing Drosophila. And really, for blackberries and raspberries, the 2 organisms that I get the most questions about are raspberry crown borer and spotted wing Drosophila. So that's what I'm going to conclude by talking about. So raspberry crown borer is one of our most significant pests of blackberries and raspberries, and if they are left unmanaged, can eventually kill entire plantings. Fortunately, they are relatively easy to control if we plan ahead. So raspberry crown borer are clear-winged day-flying moths as adults, and then their larvae bore into the crowns of blackberries and raspberries, eventually killing those canes. And if infestation is high enough, they will eventually kill the entire plant. They also make them more susceptible to cold damage and water stress. And so infestations at lower levels can also result in plant death due to those other precipitating factors. And oftentimes, folks don't know that they have a raspberry crown borer population until they go to dig up their plants and they find damage to the canes on the plants that they're removing for some other reason. They have they take 1 to 2 years to complete their life cycle. And so it does take some time to build up a population that will end up causing damage in new plantings. We manage them primarily through the use of preventative soil applied insecticides. Those are applied either once in October or once in April, and they're drench applications to the base of the plant. There's a range of different active ingredients you can use, which are listed in the North Carolina Ag Chem Manual. And they're the only recommended control at this time, but we're doing some research this year. We'll hopefully change that. We're going to be testing the efficacy of pheromone lures to see if we can utilize these to monitor adults, identify places that have infestations, and more effectively time management strategies. Moving on to our last critter I'm going to talk about, which is spotted wing Drosophila. Spotted wing Drosophila can affect all of the berry crops I talked about tonight, as well as other hosts as well. The males are shown here. They have spots on the end of their wings, which is where they get their common name. And the females are here. They lack those spots, but what they have is this large, heavily serrated egg-laying device, which allows them to insert their eggs just below the surface of otherwise undamaged fruit. The larvae develop internally and then can pupate on, in, or near the fruit, also in the soil. That entire process takes 10 to 15 days, but the adults can live for up to 1 month, which means you can have multiple overlapping generations as we go through the growing season. They're present all year long, but their rapid population growth starting around midsummer. So usually the beginning of the July is the trigger for me when spotted wing Drosophila populations are going to grow rapidly, and they attack ripe and ripening fruit. So how do we manage these guys? There's 3 main tactics that you use to manage spotted wing Drosophila. The first being using insecticides at the right time. We'll talk about what that right time is. Optimizing your cultural control strategies, and then continuing your management practices post-harvest. So first, using insecticides at the right time. We know that blackberries and raspberries are preferred hosts to some of the other things they eat. In fact, they like raspberries better than pretty much anything else you can give them, and they also survive better and are less susceptible to competition in raspberries as compared to other hosts. And we know that when they're attacking these raspberries and blackberries, they can potentially start laying eggs and fruit as soon as it starts changing color when their populations are high, as indicated in this graph here on the left. However, when we actively manage populations through using timely insecticide applications to lower their numbers, infestation is really concentrated in the perfectly ripe fruit. So next, optimizing our cultural control strategies, those non-chemical control tools. There's a suite of non-chemical control tools that are available to use against spotted wing Drosophila, and myself and colleagues have done a lot of work trying to quantify the effect of these different non-chemical tactics. These include things like exclusion netting, irrigation management, ground cover or weed mat, pruning intensity, harvest frequency, and then post-harvest cold storage. And so all of these can contribute to reducing spotted wing Drosophila populations. Specifically talking about that post-harvest cold storage management, we know that when you get fruit cold immediately after harvesting it, you both arrest the development of any spotted wing larvae or eggs that might be present in the fruit, and you also kill a significant portion of them. The colder you hold fruit, the more larvae and eggs will die. And so here I'm showing you work where we held blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries that were collected from highly infested field locations at either 2.2 degrees Celsius, which is 34 degrees Fahrenheit, or 0 degrees Celsius, which is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, for 3, 4, or 5 days. And the general take-home message from this is the colder you hold fruit for the longer amount of time, the greater mortality of any larvae that happen to be in that fruit at harvest you will experience. All right, and so just to review spotted wing Drosophila management, again, you want to use insecticides at the right time. So understand when your crop is at risk and use the right tools at that right time. Optimize your cultural control tools. Canopy management and harvest frequency are good examples of tactics we have efficacy data on here in North Carolina. And then keep your fruit as cold as possible for as long as possible post-harvest. All right, I think that's my time. So if you have any questions, again, feel free to type them in the chat box. I'll address them as we continue here, and you can find more information at these resources. Oh, it looks like you're muted, Janelle.
Yes, okay. It's an epidemic. Thank you very much, Dr. Burrack. And next we have Bill Cline, who will present on blueberries management.
Okay, sharing screen now, and I hope everyone can see that. And appreciate the invitation, and hope this is useful for you. What we're going to do on blueberries is concentrate on diseases and a little bit about blueberry culture. Some on my background, I'm in the same department as Hannah, the entomology and plant pathology department. My expertise is mainly plant diseases, but I also serve as the blueberry horticulturist in North Carolina. So that's a statewide responsibility. Some of you may have been to my pruning workshops when I'm wearing my horticulture hat. And my office is located in Castle Hayne, which is near Wilmington. So the reason I'm located near the coast is that our major blueberry industry is in Bladen and surrounding counties. So if you drive to southeastern North Carolina and you're going down Highway 701 into Bladen County, you'll just come to areas where just blueberry bushes everywhere to the tree lines. Just a lot of blueberry production. It's one of our biggest, if not our biggest, fresh fruit crop. And the reason the blueberries are there and not elsewhere in the state is because of the soils that they're growing in. So while we're going to talk about diseases, we're also going to talk a little bit about blueberry culture and about the types of soils that they will grow best in. Now, most of the home garden blueberry problems that I see are not caused by pathogens. They're cultural problems. And so we need to cover that base before we go forward with diseases. Problems that I see typically are a poor location, too shady, lack of site preparation, the wrong blueberry species, poor nutrition, and need for pruning. So these are all things that I see on smaller plantings, pick your own operations that are predominant problems on those sites. I threw in a picture there of my old springtime harrow there because one question we get is about lichens on blueberry stems, and lichens will grow on rocks. They're growing on my harrow there because I haven't used it in a long time. They'll grow on any surface that's old enough. And so when you see these on blueberry stems, it's just an indication that you need to be pruning more severely. If you look at the types of blueberries that we grow in North Carolina, this is one of those key questions that you need to answer before you buy blueberries or plant them. There are two species and basically three types. The highbush blueberry is also referred to as northern highbush. They do really well in cold climates, but they don't do well in most of North Carolina for lack of cold weather, lack of chilling. The rabbit eye blueberry species does really well in most of the state, and it would be my species of choice for Durham and for the foothills, Piedmont, and the upland areas of the coastal plain. And then if you get to the main commercial area in southeastern North Carolina, the type is most often southern highbush. And these are lower chill cultivars that are adapted to native sites. So if we talk about cultivars for the Piedmont, you're looking at the rabbit eye species. Here's some of the cultivars that I would recommend. The ones I see most commonly are Premier, Tiff Blue, Powder Blue, Climax, some of the ones listed there as standards. So again, if you go to a big box store or to a nursery to buy blueberry plants, you really want to focus on this species that is most widely soil adapted and easiest to grow in most of North Carolina. Blueberries are pretty disease resistant compared to other small fruit crops. Very often in home plantings or pick your own plantings, there's no sprays applied. And where treatments are used, it may just be for a few pathogens. So what I'd like to cover today is diseases that I think you may see in the central part of the state, where those diseases are, what they look like, when you're likely to see them, and how to control them. So again, as with Hannah, there's no time to cover all the possible diseases of this crop, but we'll focus on the ones that I think you may see where you live. So just to recap, the best native blueberry soils are low pH organic sands. So this is that southeastern North Carolina area where the soils are sand-based and there's a water table within 12 to 24 inches of the surface year round. So if you go out into these fields and dig a hole, you'll hit water. It's very unique soils. The blueberries do really well there, and they can be planted on these soils and grow successfully, even without irrigation, without mulching, just a really good blueberry site. But that's not the typical soil for most of the state. Most of the state, you have to use mulch raised beds that are amended with pine bark. I usually see sod middles in in most of the state where drainage is a challenge, or runoff is a challenge. And so this is a more common scenario throughout the Piedmont. Another thing I want to point out that's disease related, but also culturally related, is the need for using raised beds with blueberries. The picture you see here is a site in the North Carolina Piedmont, and the bushes in the center of the picture are really not doing well. This is a low area in the field. It could be root rot disease. It could just be wet feet, could just be a poorly drained area of the field. If you look around the edges of the field and the bushes in the foreground, you see they're bright or darker green and look much healthier. That's because the drainage is better in those parts of the field. But right in the center of the picture is just a low area where they're not happy. So the take home here is plant blueberries on a raised bed in most locations. You really have to consider root rot and drainage before you plant. So my recommendations for controlling Phytophthora root rot of blueberry is not to apply chemicals, but to address drainage problems before you ever plant. So good field drainage, bedding up of the rows, amending the soil to improve drainage. And finally, I would say there are some soils in North Carolina that are really heavy clays that are just not suitable for blueberry. So again, not chemical control, but good site selection and good site prep will keep you out of trouble with root diseases. Just a shot of a nice field here that the grower really took the message to heart. The blueberries are doing extremely well. It's not a typical blueberry soil, but he's really got the drainage worked out well. And so those middles are V'd out almost like a drainage ditch down each row, and the blueberries are doing quite well. So drainage is a key consideration before you ever plant. Now, I struggled with how to present some other diseases, and I thought about, well, this is the time of a year when you have to wonder where those diseases are in the wintertime. So we're going to look at overwintering sites and show some examples of the diseases I think you'll see on blueberry, and think about where they are now and how you might forestall the diseases. Now, one of the problems that I don't think you'll see is the diseases that are systemic in the plant. And these are pathogens like the stunt phytoplasma or some of the blueberry viruses. But I do want to mention those because if you are seeing virus symptoms on a blueberry plant, it's generally a systemic problem, and you usually have to get rid of the plant to get rid of the virus. Now, this is a disease, this red ring spot virus on blueberry, that we see fairly commonly in the coastal plain. I doubt you will see it in the rest of the state. But these pathogens tend to either be vectored by insects, carried around by an insect that moves the virus about, or more often through planting stock, where someone has taken cuttings from a infected plant, rooted the cutting, and the cutting and the plant that results is infected with the same virus. So really want to stress the use of clean planting stock. Get your plants from a reliable source, from a nursery, someone that has an investment in producing clean plant material. Now, the other overwintering site that I want to mention is right on the ground, a disease that just falls to the ground each year and reemerges from the ground. And our example here is mummyberry. This is a disease that occurs statewide, and get a lot of calls about it during the season, and especially at harvest. So mummyberry is a fungus. It's got a long name there, Monolinia vaccinii corumbosi. It is a pathogen that occurs every year. It overwinters on the ground, and the symptoms you see are in this photograph. This is a ripening berry that when you cut it open, you can see the white fungal tissue growing inside the berry. It's a two-stage disease. It blights leaves first and then infects fruit through the flowers. Again, this is really common around the state. And if you look at the upper left there, that's where that's the stage the disease is in at this time of year. The old infected fruit are on the ground. They look like little hollow pumpkins. And then in February, March, just about the time we're coming to now, they sprout cup-shaped mushrooms. So the top center picture, you see the little apothecia or mummy cups emerging from the old infected berry. And spores from that infected berry produced in those cups blow to the emerging leaves and blight the leaves. Spores from the blighted leaves are picked up by bees and carried to the flowers. And the spores are actually on the pollinating insect's body, and that's how the disease gets to the flowers. Once the flower is infected, you don't see any more sign of the disease until the fruit starts to ripen. Then it turns pink instead of blue and falls off on the ground, and the cycle repeats. So this is a really common disease in the state, and it's one that can be controlled. You just have to know what it looks like and when to expect it. And right now, this is what you would expect to see with mummyberry. These mummyberry apothecia, the little cup mushrooms emerging through the leaf litter under the bushes in this time of year. So this is the initiation of this disease that overwinters on the ground. Now, mummyberry control relies on fungicides, and not just fungicides, but fungicides applied at the correct time. So from bud break through bloom. Now, once you get past bloom, fruit infection has either occurred or not, and the infection period is over for the year. So really encourage you, if you have a mummyberry problem, to use fungicides. The number of materials that are effective from bud break through bloom, then this disease is over for the year as far as sprays. Now, the other thing you can do if you don't want to spray is mulch under the bushes. If these mummies that fell to the ground are buried an inch or deeper under mulch, then they can't emerge through that mulch, and you suppress the disease that way. Now, another overwintering site that I want to mention for a disease that really got a lot of calls of in recent years is right on the surface of the stem. So there's one fungus called Exobusidium that is an epiphyte on the stems. It's not especially visible, but once you have the disease in your planting, you may expect it to recur. So I'll show you some pictures of that one. And this is what the Exobusidium looks like on the fruit. So you have a green spot that does not ripen. So the rest of the berry turns blue, but the infected spot stays green. And this is really visible, really unsightly in the picked berries. And so this is a serious defect for commercial growers and for home gardeners harvesting their fruit. It also causes spots on the leaves. The upper surface of the leaf has a pale green spot. The underside is pure white fungal mycelium. So that's actually the pathogen there visible on the underside of the leaf. Again, this is a really common disease in North Carolina that's become more prevalent in recent years. This is what it looks like on Premier rabbit eye blueberry. Again, those are just infection sites on individual berries where this fungus has caused this green spot. There's been some really significant work done recently with this pathogen, and we've discovered that it overwinters as an epiphyte on the blueberry plants at a yeast-like stage. And so if you have something that's on the surface of these stems, but it's not visible to the eye, these are dormant blueberry stems with flower buds visible out on the tips of the stems. So the disease is there, but it's not yet evident. What we try to do to manage it is to kill the disease on the surface of the stems before it spreads to the emerging leaf and fruit. So for control of Exobusidium, we're spraying the blueberry bushes early and spraying them thoroughly at a delayed dormant stage. So this is 1 to 2 weeks before bud break. Again, this is a really good time of year to mention this disease and to show pictures of it, because we're right at the point where you would spray to control it. So the way to manage it is either with the multiple sprays of a fungicide. Captan works really well, or with a single delayed dormant spray with a product called lime sulfur. Now, lime sulfur is a dangerous material. The commercial growers use it quite a bit. It's not something that homeowners can buy. It's not for residential use or use on residential sites. So for a small scale spray to control this disease, you're using Cap-10 or one of the other fungicides that's labeled for or effective for this disease. But there are controls, but they do have to be applied early in the season. And really the best way you can think about this disease is to keep an eye out for it. If you see it during harvest season, then be ready the following February to spray to control it. Now, another overwintering site of diseases that we would address at this time of the year is in dead stems and infected stems. Many of these pathogenic fungi that affect blueberry overwinter, not on the ground, not on the surface of healthy stems, but in dead or infected stems. And sometimes you can see that this time of year. You see these stems that have died and need to be pruned out. And sometimes if you see the picture in the upper left, you can actually see the fruiting bodies of the fungus protruding through the bark of that stem, and these little white tendrils of just millions of spores coming out of that infected stem. So from a practical standpoint, if you've got a dead stem on a blueberry, very often you can run your hand up and down the stem and feel that rough sandpaper texture, which is those thousands of fungal fruiting bodies of Pycnidia or Parathecia sticking through the skin of the stem, sticking through the bark. And so if it's a rough feeling cane, then that may well be those fungal fruiting bodies that are present coming through the stem. One thing you can do for that everyone should practice routinely with blueberries is to prune. And if you're pruning, you're shaping the bush and rejuvenating it. You're taking out these weak and diseased canes. This is a picture of the same bush before and after. So you can see I prune pretty hard and prune out the low angle branches and crossovers in the bush and prune to this upright growth habit. And the yellow numbers there just show the number of pruning cuts it took to prune that bush. So 4 cuts and you're on to the next bush. The blueberry pruning is about making big cuts down low in the bush. Now, another pathogen group I'd like to spend a little time talking about is fruit rots. And this is Polytotricum ripe rot on blueberry, these orange spore masses on the face of that berry in the calyx. And this is a infection that often takes place in the field prior to harvest. The infection period where fungicides work the best for this disease is actually at bloom, while this is still a flower. Another fungal pathogen that's really common on blueberry is Botrytis, flower blight, and fruit rot. And you're actually seeing again the signs of the pathogen itself, that gray fuzzy mold on the fruit. And of course, when you go to the grocery store, you see blueberries that have mold growing on them. You put them down and you go pick up something else because you don't want moldy fruit. So, our goal here is to have fruit that's not infected by these pathogens. And we did some work many years ago looking at post-harvest ripe rot infection. So that fungus that has the orange spores. And we found something really interesting there. We found out that it's extremely important to handle fruit dry. And so if you look at this table, this is blueberry fruit that we handled either dry or wet and on clean or dirty surfaces. So if you look at the first line that says field pack, that's just picked straight into the cup, no more handling. And the fruit's fairly clean. After 7 days at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 1.5% decay, which is really low. And we also found that if we sorted the fruit, handled it on clean surfaces, we didn't get much more, 2.1% decay. And even if the surface was really dirty, say the bucket had spores in it or the surface we were sorting them on was really dirty, as long as the fruit was dry, still 3.6% decay. Where these fungal post-harvest rots really explode is when you handle fruit wet. And when you see blueberries in the grocery store, where there's just a moldy mess and the fruit is in the clamshell just does not look appetizing, it's probably fruit that was picked in wet weather. Because if you look at the fruit that's sorted wet in this graph, even on clean surfaces, we shot up to 8% decay. And on surfaces that had lots of spores on it, 63%. So most of the berries decayed in that treatment. So really want to stress handling fruit dry. Most of the decay on blueberries occurs at post-harvest decay occurs at the stem scar, and that scar is not exposed until you pick the berry. So the clock is really ticking on that fruit once you detach it from the bush. So for these diseases, for the blueberry rot fungi, this is my summary of blueberry handling advice. I like to see the berries picked in a timely manner, at least every 7 to 10 days when they're ripening, and pick all the ripe blueberries on the bush at each harvest date. You want to handle the berries dry, pick them dry, handle them dry, and keep them cool. The spores are always present in nature, so you always need to cool fruit. And don't rely on fungicides for this type of rot control in harvest. The fungicides are most effective at bloom for these diseases, but by the time you're into harvest, they're not going to do you a lot of good. So just to recap on fungicides, the fungicidal control is mostly protective. You have to apply them before you see the disease. That means you have to know what pathogens you have in your field, and based on previous years' experience, apply these products protectively. So a typical disease management scenario for blueberries, these are what I think of as the tools that you use. Fungicides are only part of this picture. So on the upper left, I think the first and most important consideration is site selection, site preparation, cultivar selection, all the cultural things that you do to have healthy plants. Then the springtime fungicide applications, again, only if you see these diseases. You don't need to treat for anything you don't have. Then in harvest, the yellow box there, you want to handle the fruit dry and cool it rapidly. Post-harvest sprays are often not needed. So really the next opportunity you have to manage diseases is in the wintertime. Mulching, pruning to remove dead and diseased wood where those fungi overwinter. And I want to thank Hannah for showing all the links earlier. Most of the disease control material is in the same sites. I also wanted to mention one other link, which is on the smallfruits.org website, and this is the 2019 Blueberry School. So it was a agent training school that covered not just diseases and insects, but also pruning, irrigation, cultivar selection. A lot of blueberry topics are available as PowerPoints or YouTube videos, however you want to watch them, under the agent training link at smallfruits.org. And I think I'm about out of time, and that's what I wanted to cover there. So I'll be glad to take questions now or later.
We have time for questions if anybody has questions they'd like to pose to Bill right now. If not, we are ready for our last and final presenter, is Dr. Sara Villani. She will talk about blackberries, which are...
Hey everyone, let me go ahead, and I should know how to do this in my sleep by now, sharing these screens, but...
Right. And just for anyone who wants the pesticide credits, I will prompt you after Dr. Villani's presentation, on which I will ask you to place your name and your license number in the chat, but I'll do that at the end of the presentation.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Janelle. And, you know, the other day I wrote to Janelle to get an idea of the type of audience we would have tonight. And it seemed like there would be quite a few commercial growers, perhaps some homeowners mixed in there as well. So I attempted to not make this too rudimentary for the commercial grower, sort of like Hannah, and hopefully not too advanced for the new people starting out with blackberry growing. So for those of you, sorry, just to kind of introduce myself before going on, I'm Sara Villani, and I'm located out in the mountain region of the state. So I was originally hired to work on apples and woody ornamental diseases. And most of the apple production, as you might be aware, is located out here near Henderson County, North Carolina. However, my position responsibilities have changed recently, and I've also inherited blackberries or any kind of caneberry, and grapes, and even dabbling in a little bit of strawberry work right now as well. And so for those new folks out there just starting to get into blackberry production, I'm along with you right there. I'm learning as we go. So please feel free just to interrupt me at any point, and I'll be happy to answer your questions to the best of my ability. Okay, so for tonight's goals, I first wanted to hit on plant decline in general. We had a number of samples come into our lab this year and through the disease clinic with just poor blackberry plant health. And, you know, a lot of the time we thought, okay, this could be viruses, and it ended up not being viruses. So I just wanted to sort of make you aware of the different biotic and abiotic factors that could cause plant decline. But then, of course, we're going to go ahead and focus a little bit of our time on distinguishing virus symptoms from other plant problems, just because there are over 40 different viruses on blackberries. Yeah, that could happen. Okay, next, you know, fungal diseases are certainly one of the biggest issues or biggest problems for growers when trying to grow blackberries, especially in warm, humid climates like North Carolina. So I just want to go through a few of the common few that you have, sort of like what Hannah and Bill did in their 25 minutes. And then lastly, as time permits, I don't want to go too far into fungicide resistance tonight, but I just wanted to bring it up with you, especially in conjunction with our Botrytis talk. I think it's important just to make you aware and talk about some of the tactics you can use to mitigate or slow down fungicide resistance. Hannah did a great job, and Bill also did a great job of showing you some resources that were out there. I don't remember them, but I could have been answering an email real quick if they mentioned the My IPM app. And I find it to be a really great tool for both extension agents, commercial growers, and homeowners alike. And really what this tool is, it's an extension tool which incorporates a number of different crops and problems such as insects, diseases, and weeds within those crops. Originally, this app at Clemson University and only included diseases of peaches and I believe strawberries it was. And it's now expanded into a number of fruit crops. And like I mentioned, gives you information on weeds, diseases, and insects. And both Bill and myself from NC State are involved in developing content for this app. And it's free on the Google Store or on the iOS store, the whatever that's called, the Mac store there, the Mac App Store. But anyway, what this can do is, you know, it gives you a general overview of what diseases are out there on blackberry or blueberry, whatever other crop you're curious about. If you go ahead and search into it, you can look at high resolution images of different diseases, maybe their spores and what those look at. It'll give you some options, not necessarily the spray timing, but will give you options of active ingredients, trade names. You can also get into more information about the disease cycle. So if we didn't cover your disease of interest tonight, feel free to go ahead and download this app. And if you're growing multiple crops and have a diverse production system, hopefully this app will satisfy you as well. And I believe vegetables are also going to be incorporated, as well as field crops to help you all out there. Okay, so let's go ahead now and let's go ahead and start with reasons for blackberry decline. For this entire, for this past season, and also the disease and insect clinic as well that Hannah mentioned earlier, that clinic that's a great resource for you. Okay, so to start out here, I have 3 different photos. Anyone know what that has in common? What they have in common? Okay, probably not because no one's talking right now, but these are actually all caused by fungal diseases. And if you could name what caused each of these, I would let you go ahead and take my juggle to decipher some of these fungal diseases. Okay, so right here, these are early symptoms of orange rust, where you see these spindly sort of new growth coming out, followed by these ragged edges and just poor growth and chlorosis on the plant. We're going to talk about orange rust a little bit later. Okay, right here in the middle, I got this photo. This ended up, there's general plant decline and death. And this was Fusarium Oxysporum, historically a soil pathogen, and not really historically a soil. However, Bill Cline a few years back actually identified this for the first time in North Carolina, and it is something for us to watch out for. If you do have Fusarium Oxysporum, there's really no way that I'm aware of to control it once it's in your plant. And then right here on the right side, this was a new one for us. I got a phone call out from Iredell County this year. And this poor grower and this extension agent were trying to deal with a problem where they just had poor fruit production later on in the season. They were doing both a primocane and floricane fruiting on their Primarks, 45s, I believe they were. And what you can see here is you see this curling of the leaves maybe. They never got a crop really past, or a crop ripening past September, and generally stunting. And as we continue to sample throughout that area, this was caused, we believe, by a Calototricum pathogen, which hasn't been shown here in North Carolina yet to cause woody tissue or plant decline or invade woody tissue to an extent where it causes appreciable damages. So keep that in mind there. Okay. Next, certainly some of the bacterial diseases can infect blackberry. The most common one that you might be aware of is actually a pretty prolific apple pathogen, and that is called Erwinia amylavra, or fire blight. Okay, Erwinia amylavra is the pathogen. And the problem with fire blight is that once it gets into your plant, it travels vascularly against the xylem tissue. Okay, and you can see these characteristic wilting symptoms right here. And the infection is severe enough. This is on an apple tree because I haven't seen much fire blight or any fire blight here in North Carolina yet, but you'll sometimes see some of the ooze starting to come out of the stems. And each little droplet of ooze contains millions and millions of bacterial cells. So this can be a pretty ugly pathogen if it invades either your blossoms or your stems. And one easy way for it to invade is through pruning or any kind of wound in the stem, right? And so with some of our summer pruning that we do on blackberries, we need to be aware of this pathogen and just be careful. Okay, another bacterial pathogen, it looks very similar to fire blight, forming what we call a shepherd's crook right here. This was identified as a pathogen from some of my colleagues in Arkansas, and that's called Pantovia Agglomerans. We're going to end up doing some more work on this bacterial pathogen because I'm not 100% convinced yet it's actually causing these symptoms here. The pathogen is very similar in nature to the fire blight pathogen, and they'll often sort of travel together. So that's one area of research where I'm interested in, is it just hijacking itself into the tissue or not? But anyway, it can cause this shepherd's crook appearance. And then right here, I believe this was actually insect damage, but you can see how similar it looks to a typical fire blight infection, and why it's so difficult for us as specialists sometimes to give you an accurate identification just with photographs. Right. Next, certainly what's going to comprise the bulk of this talk today are viruses. These are also vascular in nature, and I get a number of virus type calls a year. However, most of them actually aren't virus problems. They're just suspected virus problems. But as I mentioned earlier, there's over 40 known viruses of blackberry known to exist. Some of the examples here are blackberry yellow vein associated virus, blackberry virus Y. These viruses are part of a bigger complex called blackberry yellow vein disease. Okay, and generally the virus symptoms are pretty spectacular. You'll see chlorosis, sometimes it's mottling, and we'll get into this a little bit later. Certainly stunting, which can also mimic other plant decline symptoms or other issues out there, particularly nutrient problems.
I believe we may have lost her, but I'm sure she'll be back. It's in the mountains. Perhaps we have a little bit of internet issues.
I can send her a message real quick as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Aw, He's a cute kid.
We could do questions maybe until she
Yeah.
comes back.
That's a great idea. So we can, Bill, oh, there she is. I'll admit her in. All right.
Let's go ahead and try this again. Sorry, guys. Janelle, when did I get kicked out there?
You just did.
Oh, man, that's
just
cool.
as we're talking about the viruses and then
Right, and the abiotic stuff. All right, no problem. I've learned to roll with this here at the research station. So I apologize for that. I can't do much about the internet here, unfortunately. We're in a low spot. Okay, so if I get kicked out again, just I need to share my screen, don't I, first? That would be helpful. Okay, I need to be able to get in, please, Janelle. You'll have to add me again as a host, please. And then we'll just roll with it. Virtual fun. Okay, let's see here. It's gonna let me. Cool. All right. We're gonna keep rocking and rolling. If you have any questions, just let me know. And then if I get kicked out again, I'll just ask Bill to give the rest of this because he knows Blackberry diseases quite well. Likely better than me at this point. Okay, so can you all hear me? Everything's good? All right. So anyway, there can also be abiotic disorders that mimic Blackberry decline. And some of those would be simazine injury or other herbicide injury, certainly nutrient disorders, as we discussed here, and then winter injury. So if your blackberries are planted in a low-lying area, oftentimes that little patch there can get quite cold, right? And I've actually seen this this past summer, where you could just drive through the grower's planting, and if we suddenly went down the hill, he would point out, Sarah, there's where the decline is again. I think that's a virus, but no, that's winter injury. And there are some opportunistic fungal pathogens, such as Phomopsis, you'll hear me talking about occasionally. Those can also invade the tissue. There's little microcracks that occur. So you'll have winter injury followed by colonization of maybe an opportunistic pathogen like Phomopsis. Okay. So let's go ahead here now and just talk a little bit about blackberry viruses in North Carolina. And NC State has a micropropagation unit, which deals a lot with clean plants. But what they also do, or propagating, I should say, clean plants for nurseries. But what they also do as a service or as an add-on service through the disease clinic is they will diagnose, they'll run tests for viruses for your submitted samples. And I'll talk to you in a little bit about how to submit those samples for virus screening if you suspect a virus. Okay, but here's the list of there's 34 possible viruses that they can test for at NC State. These are very intense. They're molecular tests. They're not inexpensive to run. And so really what we do is we need to select out of all of these which viruses we would want to screen for you if you did have a specific, or if you did have a virus concern, right? And so I asked Christy Almeida, she runs the NC State micropropagation unit, and she also is quite versed in virus screening. But anyway, I did ask her sort of, okay, can you summarize what we typically see here in North Carolina? Because a lot of virus symptoms look very similar. And fortunately, out of these 34 different possible viruses that they can test for, there are really 6 that come up somewhat frequently here in North Carolina. And interestingly, these are all part of a bigger complex called Blackberry yellow vein disease, okay? And I'll talk about this again a little bit later as well. But interestingly, with blackberries, when it comes to this Blackberry yellow vein disease, you usually need at least 2 viruses in order for symptoms to be expressed, which is kind of cool if you think about it. So if your plant is only infected and we detect only one of these viruses here and nothing else, it could be that maybe it's not the virus itself that's causing the symptoms, or it could be another virus that we're just not aware of yet. But again, plants need to be infected, blackberry plants in general need to be infected with at least 2 viruses in order for symptoms to be expressed. Okay. There are other viruses that make up the Blackberry yellow vein disease complex, beet pseudoyellow tobacco ring spot virus, and Blackberry virus S. But unfortunately, we don't encounter those that often here or at all in North Carolina. Okay. Christy also gave me sort of a generalized view of across the entire North America of how frequent some of these Blackberry viruses are. And if we can, okay, and number one, just to give you an idea, means that the virus is known to occur in the region and move throughout different plants or different blocks, usually through pollen or insect vectors at that point. And then this can go all the way to number 4, where it's not known to occur, and 5 means no data. And if we go ahead and hone here in the southeastern United States, you can see that a number of these viruses are known to occur and do move through, and have been known to move with vectors such as insect vectors or pollen through different plants or different plantings. Highlighted there in the yellow or the orange, those again are part of the Blackberry yellow vein disease complex. So if you were to submit a sample for testing, even though we have 34 viruses to choose from, we would likely go ahead and narrow it down with this list right here. Okay, so how about some quick quirks and factoids about Blackberry viruses? Like I said, over 40 of them, 25 of them identified here in North America. The viruses involved in virus disease complex will often vary by region or even by state, as I showed you right there in the previous slide. Okay. Again, what the heck is a disease complex? It means that the plant must be infected with more than one virus usually. It's called co-infection in order for symptoms to be expressed. So if you've only got the one virus, you should be okay. It'll just hang in there asymptomatically. And then all Blackberry viruses, as far as I know, can be transferred by either grafting or vegetative propagation. Insects also serve as important vectors, but many of those are likely not identified, right? So we do have some insect vectors identified for certain viruses or specific viruses, but we may still not know the breadth of those insects. So oftentimes, just relying on vector or insect vector control can be quite difficult for controlling viruses. All right. So since Blackberry yellow vein disease seems to be the problem child here in North Carolina, let's go ahead now and just talk about a few of those symptoms. Okay, the first symptom that you see here at A, that's called an oak leaf pattern. And why is it called that? I believe it's because it looks like an oak leaf. I don't know. It looks like a bunch of scribble scrabble to me, but that's that. Okay, ring spots. Ring spots are not so recognizable or identifiable as some may think, I would argue. For example, these are both ring spots. A lot of time I've seen calcium deposits leave this kind of mark, maybe herbicide deposits. Okay, maybe even a little bit of insect feeding, okay, as they move around. So that does count as a symptom though. Leaf mottling, as you see here, and you might also see leaf mottling with fungal diseases such as orange rust. Okay. Vein yellowing, again, herbicide injury might show a vein yellowing, as well as something like herbicide injury or some sort of nutrition deficiency or excess. And then this chlorotic feathering, as you see in this photo and in this photo here, where the chlorosis or the yellowing just seems to spread out. Okay. As the symptoms progress, you'll start to see that feathering actually turn necrotic or dead on that midvein and through the veins as well. So that's something else to look out for. Okay, there are 10 different viruses associated with Blackberry yellow vein disease. If you're going out to scout, try starting in the lower canopy and looking on mature leaves. Okay, that's where we'll usually see the symptoms at first. These viruses don't specifically kill the plant, but they will cut the production by around 66, 2/3 to 75%, I would say. Okay, and then of course look for other general decline symptoms such as stunting, aborted berry development, and whatnot. So your profits aren't going to be as great likely if you have 2 or more viruses in your plant. Okay. So what are some tips then, right? I was saying before that, so a lot of these specific virus symptoms look similar to other abiotic and biotic problems. Okay, so here are some things that I would go ahead and consider. First of all, consider how many plants showed symptoms at similar timing and how those symptoms are distributed across the field. So for example, if you went out and sprayed something hot, maybe caftan with some oil, or maybe an herbicide got left in the sprayer, I'm not sure. But you would see symptoms in that case developing at a very similar time, and you'd probably see that going all the way down a row, right? Whereas virus symptoms will probably pop up more sporadically, and oftentimes you might see them in a few rows, if depending on the source material, or you might even see it more sporadically if it's being moved by an insect vector or something along those lines. Okay. On that note, go ahead and check your weeds and grasses in the field. Are those presenting similar coloration symptoms? Okay, if they are, it could signal some kind of nutrient imbalance, maybe in the soil. Perhaps it could signal herbicide problems as well. Okay, so keep that in mind, that if the grasses, the weeds are showing similar symptoms as your blackberry plants, it could be something you applied or some sort of nutrient imbalance. Also consider if it's the first year you've noticed these symptoms at this timing in the field, or if you've noticed similar symptoms in previous seasons. If you started to see some symptoms in previous symptoms and they've just gotten a little bit worse this past year, it would, to me, it would most likely signal more of a virus problem than something else. Okay. Okay. Also observe how the symptoms on the plant or throughout the field are progressing throughout the season. Oftentimes with something like an herbicide injury, the plant will go ahead and grow out of it if you're fortunate. Whereas if it's a virus, the symptoms are just going to get worse and worse. Okay. Double check to confirm plants were purchased from the nursery with virus tested stock. And then although it's not foolproof, check the woody tissue for symptoms. Okay, go ahead and cut into it. Viruses do, but less frequently, cause canker problems and dieback that's associated with things like fungal pathogens, as you see here. Oftentimes we'll see necrosis or death in the vascular tissue with fungal pathogens, but not necessarily with viruses. Okay, so let's go ahead now and say we want to go ahead and submit virus samples for diagnosis. Okay, if you're not removing the entire plant, please go ahead and mark the symptomatic plant. I often select leaves and then I forget where the heck I collected them from. So if you have multiple bushes, mark the plant. Okay, for each symptomatic plant, you're going to want to remove 5 leaves at least with the petiole intact. Okay, so you want that stem on there. These leaves should be of intermediate age, so grab them from the mid-shoot region. You don't want something that's too crusty or too symptomatic. And we don't want anything that's like really necrotic or have like a lot of dead tissue on it. And again, you want a random sampling throughout the plant. Don't just take, or arbitrary sampling, don't just take from the top of the plant for convenience. Okay, you'll then take those leaves, stick them in a plastic bag. And I would suggest making sure that you wear gloves between plants because the virus can be transmitted quite easily, or use alcohol to clean your hands and pruners between collections. You want to clearly label that bag, put it in a cooler with ice, get in touch with your agent to help you send it overnight to a diagnostic lab, and then email them and myself to give them a heads up. Okay, how are we going to manage these blackberry viruses? Well, for the first thing, they can't be cured. Okay, that's one thing, sort of like coronavirus really can't be cured. We can just prevent it. Okay, so manage viruses occurs during the pre-plant period and through vector management. Okay, so we want to go ahead and we want to purchase clean plants. Okay, that's number 1, a reputable source. Number 2, for nepoviruses, those are viruses that are spread by nematodes. You can have nematode surveys. It's very inexpensive, under $10, and it's often good. There are dagger nematodes, which can transmit certain viruses. Okay, so keep that in mind. You also want to survey for wild blackberries, as those can also serve as a reservoir for some of these viruses. And then, of course, insect vector IPM, and I'll leave that to Hannah, but certainly trapping, managing insect vectors, etc. We know that whiteflies, some mites, leafhoppers, thrips may all serve as vectors for many of these viruses. Okay, now I probably won't get to the fungicide resistance part tonight because of the screw up there, but that's okay. I just want to go through a few of these fungal diseases. And my first was in contact with Janelle through Bill Cline regarding some rust problems. And so that's the most important thing I think that we cover as far as fungal diseases tonight. And there are 2 very similar, there are 2 rust diseases on blackberries that appear somewhat similar. And one is orange rust, as you see down here in the bottom right-hand corner. And this is extremely devastating. This can enter the tissue, this can become a vascular problem. And once it's inside of your plant, there's really not much that can be done. Alternatively, why it's so important to diagnose the correct rust is the other rust is cane and leaf rust. And this often appears as more of a yellow color. These are ichthyospores. These often occur as more of a yellow color, okay, more patchy, and they don't travel systemically, right? So this is something that we can just manage in the field, and there's no reason to destroy your plants. Okay. So let's start with the easier one, the cane and leaf rust. Signs and symptoms. You're going to want to start to scout your floricanes beginning in the late spring. Okay, and what you're going to want to look for at first is around mid-spring or so, you'll start to see these yellow colored spore structures called uridinia, often coming from the canes, this year's floricanes. Okay, so go ahead and look for that. Okay, by early summer, you'll see these iridinia here on the back side of the leaves, again, very sporadic. And then by July through autumn, oftentimes you'll see this premature defoliation in severe cases and a new fungal structure called telia starting to form. All right, but go ahead. And again, this one is not as devastating as orange rust by any means. Okay, how are we going to go ahead and control this? Certainly, cultural is the first line of defense. Okay, you're going to want to go ahead and make sure those floricanes, this is true for a number of diseases, you're going to want to make sure those floricanes are cut to the ground after harvest, and make sure you destroy those floricanes. Don't just let them sit there rotting away in the on the ground there. If you see any, it's rare, but if you do see any infection on your primicanes as you're scouting through your blocks, make sure you go ahead and prune those, and again, destroy those. Chemically, to reduce that early inoculum, now is the time, or to start thinking about it, not now, but to start thinking about it, is a delayed or dormant application of lime sulfur. There are people using sulfurix. There's a lot less material that you have to use than lime sulfur, so that's often preferred. Okay. How are you going to manage this? So with fungicides during the growing season, your strobulurins, which are Frac 7, your strobies, some of those fungicides that include strobies that are registered for commercial growers are pristine. Has 2 active ingredients. Quilt Excel also has 2 actives. Abound, which has just a strobie in it, and Cabrio also just has the strobie in it. Those are all excellent. Your DMI fungicides, your Frac 3, something like Tilt or Rally 40 WSP. And yeah, you want to include those fungicides for the rust management at green tip, and then continue through bloom, and then scout is the timing for those. Okay, alternatively, and this will probably be the last slide today, I might just bring up Botrytis real quickly, but orange rust, okay? As you can see here, the symptoms look very different than our cane and leaf rust, okay? So they appear often much more orange in color, and do affect the structure and the growing habits of the plants as well. So in early spring, you'll see these spindly leaves emerging from the floricane, so go ahead and scout for that. By late spring, waxy orange pustules, which are the ecia forming on the bottom of the leaf, kind of look like orange blotches just plastered on there. And then similarly to the cane and leaf rust, expect some leaf drop and weak spindly shoots emerging from systemically infected root buds there. Okay, so what can you do to manage orange rust? During the pre-plant period, you're going to want to make sure to really inspect those transplants for any rust symptoms. Look through that. You don't want to introduce this pathogen to your planting. Also, although it's difficult, if you can remove wild blackberries, even on the ones that are the nearest to your planting, that's a good idea. I mean, the recommendation is greater than a quarter of a mile from the field. That can often be difficult, and I do sympathize with that. But they can bring in orange rust, and they can harbor orange rust. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Once you planted, okay, make sure that you're inspecting emerging canes and shoots early to the mid-spring period. Okay? You're going to want to immediately remove anything that looks symptomatic and the roots, right? Because it is traveling systemically, and destroy it. Okay? We often consider a herbicide application like glyphosate after we remove it, just to make sure we got rid of all the roots as best as possible. And the Navajo are extremely susceptible. So go ahead and consider a different cultivar. And then lastly, fungicides that you can use. Again, if you have problems in your planting, you're going to want to protect your other plants. Your strobulurins are quite good, and DMIs, just like your cane and leaf rust. Okay, but you can't cure the infected plant. And with that, I'm going to be out of time, but I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. And yeah, you can always go ahead and email me as well.
Thank you very much. So I just wanted to let anyone know that has would like CEU credits, now's the time to place your name and your license number into the chat. I've also placed in the chat a link to our workshop feedback form. You will also get this in an email, but if you want to do it right now while it's fresh on your mind, we'd greatly appreciate any feedback we have on this workshop. It helps us to put together workshops that are most beneficial for you. And does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers? You can feel free to just unmute yourself and speak. Well, I have a question for Sarah.
Yeah.
So for the Blackberry virus, can you, if you start to see symptoms in one leaf, is the whole plant infected and you have to just tear it out, or can't cut it out?
If you see symptoms, it usually means that the plant's going to be systemically infected at that point. It is probably not just one leaf that has it, but there's likely several other leaves or tissue where the virus actually is.
So then how many plants would you expect, or because it's likely insect vectored, would that mean that now you have a patch that's probably has it as well?
Depends on what insect that is. I mean, my feeling is that, they have to get into the field somehow. And so if they're coming in on the stock source, that could be a bigger problem, I would argue at that point. What I would suggest that if we do have a suspect plant and it does come back confirmed to be a virus, what we would do is likely go ahead and take a greater sampling of your area, a little bit more distributed, right? So we wouldn't just focus on one plant, but we would take more of a systematic approach to sampling just to get a better idea.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly looking along the edges, right? If they're insect vectored, would be one area. If the insects are emerging from the wooded areas, certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
If there
No.
There's a question in the chat there.
There is one. All right, I didn't see it. Hold on, let me see. Okay. If you get a virus and pull the plant, then if you replant, is the soil or is it soil-borne and likely to infect the next plant if you put a new blackberry plant in?
Not with a virus usually. I would say the caveat is, get rid of all the roots, I would suggest. And make sure you clean that area out. From what my knowledge is, unless it's caused by a nematode and is transmitted by a nematode, that wouldn't be necessarily one of my bigger concerns. Bill, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money there, Sarah. There's a few viruses that are nematode vectored, and they're going to remain in that nematode population in the soil. But anything else that's not nematode vectored, I would expect to be able to replant in that spot and with a clean plant and it remain clean.
Exactly.
And there is one Blackberry virus that's been found in North Carolina that is nematode vectored. Mm-hmm. And so among those, that complex of pathogens that can cause Blackberry yellow vein associated virus is one that is nematode vectored. And so testing for nematodes in your soil would be a useful thing to do to determine if you have those vector groups present.
That's really the bottom line. That if you do have tobacco ring spot virus, that's one we'll quite often see, and it's very inexpensive. So there is a question about what's the protocol for nematode testing. So if you're an extension agent, what will happen is you can ask the NCDA, and I've got those contacts that I can provide you if you send me an email, I can send those to Janelle. But they will actually come out for most people and do, or at least commercial plantings. I know they do go out and collect the nematode samples for you. So it really just involves putting a soil core into the ground and pulling out a sample there. So that's one approach that can be taken. And then they'll go ahead and analyze those nematode samples for you. And I believe really it's under $10 a sample. It's nothing. I don't know if you're just not aware of the service or what, but to me, there's really not many options that can be done if you do have a nematode problem, let alone if they're transmitting a virus or not. And so before you plant, my recommendation is to always have a soil test done, and along with that, a nematode survey conducted, because really for $10, $20, you're going to be saving yourself potentially hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars in the long run. So, and like I said, and the NCDA is also willing to work with agents to teach them how to do some of that sampling as well. And there we go. The offices can definitely help folks collect samples. So really, don't skimp out on that. That's one of my take-home messages for tonight. There are some new disease-resistant cultivars, not fully disease-resistant, I would argue. So there are many cultivars, many in the Primark series that are thornless, which is lovely. And also, right, Bill, those are thornless, the Primark, or are they not thornless? Am I getting those confused?
The Primark Freedom is
okay.
The original
45s
Primark was thorny, yeah.
Yeah, but there are several new cultivars that are out there that are not as susceptible to Navajo. Bill, do you know any more? Like you've been doing this a lot longer than I, so maybe you can comment. I'll pass the buck to you there.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've been sort of on the edges of the blackberry industry in the southeastern part of the state. A lot of people planting the thornless types. So you see Washita, which is Arkansas release, as a lot of them are. The Primark varieties, Primark 45 is thorny, but it's been planted quite a bit. And then Primark Freedom is one that I'm pretty excited about because it's a primocane fruiter, large fruited, and it does not have thorns. So,
great.
So there's this exciting time to be looking at blackberries. A lot of nice cultivars out there.
Great. Thanks, Bill.
So I have a question for you, Dr. Burrack, on strawberries. For a home grower who maybe is doing some not like June bearing, but maybe a more longer bearing, ever bearing strawberry and a spotted wing Drosophila, would they have more of an issue with that because you have fruit around for longer?
Yeah, so the big determinant as to whether a crop is at risk to spotted wing Drosophila is fruit timing, harvest timing. And so we have low spotted wing Drosophila populations in the first half of the growing season in North Carolina. In the second half of the growing season after July, we have high populations. And so we typically don't have issues with spotted wing Drosophila in our spring fruiting strawberries, not because they don't like strawberries, but because we don't have a lot of flies in the spring. If we grow strawberries that fruit in the fall, you can have very high spotted wing Drosophila infestation issues. And so what homeowners can do to reduce the likelihood of having high spotted wing pressure in those day neutral or ever bearing varieties are three things. They can utilize things like exclusion netting. So they can have netted covers over the plants that'll reduce the number of flies that can get in there. It won't completely eliminate them. They can harvest fruit frequently and completely. And so if you get berries off the plant as soon as they are ripe, that's going to reduce the amount of time egg-laying flies have to find them and attack them. And then they also can get their fruit as cold as possible for as long as possible following harvest. And so pop it in the fridge, leave it in the fridge until you eat it.
They're just higher protein.
They are higher protein and they're not going to be harmful. So the one thing that I get asked a lot about spotted wing is if there's any risk or danger associated with having them in your fruit, and there is not, just if you are squeamish.
So anyone else have any other questions? If not, I really want to thank you very much for all of you attending, and thank you very much for our presenters.